Well, welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. We have a lot to cover today, and we want to make sure that we have time to really spend on talking about this content and making sure that you have, if you have questions, that we can also have a discussion about those as well. So just a note that if you have any questions throughout this presentation, feel free to put them in the chat, and then we will be responding to those at the end. So welcome. You are here to listen to a presentation about academic parenthood. We have a wonderful panel of people that are early, mid, and senior career that really represent diverse universities and responsibilities. And so we are excited to share our experiences with you in the effort to basically give you new ideas or possibly have you think about things a little bit differently, knowing that all of us have different strategies, different experiences with academic parenthood, and there's no one size fits all. So I'm going to start by talking about some of the research, and then that'll be about 15-20 minutes. And then we are going to go into the panel who will talk about their strategies and challenges from a personal level related to academic parenthood. So first, I just like to let you know who is on the panel, and they're each going to introduce themselves really briefly. So I am Bryn Harris from the University of Colorado, Denver. I'm an associate professor, and I have 2 kids, a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old. Lindsay, would you please introduce yourself?
Absolutely. I'm Lindsay Fallon. I am an assistant professor at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, and I have 3 children who I will tell you more about in a little bit, a 9-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 3-year-old.
Thank you. And Erin.
Hi, I'm Erin Harper. I'm an assistant professor at Texas A&M University Commerce, and I'm the mom of a 5-year-old. I'm a very active 5-year-old. So I look forward to speaking with you all today.
Thank you. And Sterret.
I am Sterret Mercer. I'm a professor at the University of British Columbia, and I have 2 girls, 13 and 11.
Wonderful. Shannon.
Hello, my name is Shannon Suldo. I'm coming to you from Tampa, Florida. I'm at the University of South Florida, and my children are ages 12 and 9.
Okay, so I'm going to jump right in and we will talk about some of the research. So first of all, I want to start with some positive spins on this presentation and the world of academic parenthood. So first, I just want to make sure everyone is aware that there are so many advantages to academic parenthood, and we really do want to talk about some of the benefits that academia has pertaining to flexibility and roles, and there's a lot of great things about being in academia as a parent. We also want to be very honest with you about the research in this area and very transparent that there are challenges and that mothers and fathers deal with balancing career and family, and that even that term balancing implies that we do some things better than others at all times. And I think the panel will agree that there are a lot of feelings like that amongst all of us. And we also want to own that women have different, unique needs. There are physical realities that need to be considered around pregnancy, childbirth, and nursing that are different for women than for men. And also there are socialization factors in terms of how men and women are traditionally socialized related to gender norms and expectations. One size does not fit all. There are lots of different strategies. And it's also important that we talk about the fact that family planning is your personal decision. I think a lot of us have had people give us opinions or information about when the best time is to have a baby. And I want you to take that with a grain of salt, because that is definitely a decision that should be made in a personal way. And I do recognize that your career might have an influence on that, but also there's a lot of privilege to that decision, and sometimes the decision is not easily controlled. But more than anything, you can be a great academic parent and a great academic in general. So in terms of the effect on research productivity, There's a quote from this article from 2014. "We conclude that having a first child need not doom an academic career." So this study looked at some different demographic variables in terms of what was more advantageous related to research productivity in academia. So women aged 30 to 34 who had a partner and a planned pregnancy fared stronger than those in other situations. And for untenured men, there's a positive effect of fatherhood on research productivity. And then there's also an initial productivity hit, and mothers seem to remain more productive throughout their academic careers as well. So there's some positive here. But if you have a child under the age of 30, if you're a single mother, if you have multiple children, and the younger the children are, there are more factors that influence some challenges related to research productivity. And we'll get into some of the specifics there. Women in academia also experience a 20% drop in productivity after having a child, while the research comparing their male counterparts that also have children at the same time do not. And so really this difference of how parenting roles are conceptualized and how they exist within relationships is seen as one of the key reasons why men publish more than women. And we know that publishing is really linked to things like promotion, tenure, funding. So this can have long-term impact on the individuals as well as the field of academia in general. And the gap is also bigger with respect to submissions to higher impact journals. So we see that between women and men, women are less likely to publish and submit within higher impact journals than men, which can have ramifications related to promotion, tenure, funding as well. I really wanted to talk about COVID as well, because this has also exacerbated differences between women and men. So women are responsible for 75% of unpaid care in domestic world on a global scope. And so during COVID, women have been 3 times as likely to become the sole caregiver for children versus men. And this idea from working from home, really, I'd like us to think about it more as living at work. The boundaries are much different right now, and women are more likely to be suffering professionally from that work-home lack of boundary. And during COVID, on a national scope and within all disciplines, women are submitting fewer manuscripts than male counterparts. Specific to tenure, women do enter academia at commensurate rates to men. And in our field, we have more women than men. Right now in academia, we have about 63% of people in academia identify as women. However, fewer women than men persist in academia. So fewer earn tenure or advance from associate to full professor. And women with children are more likely to drop off the tenure track path. So move into clinical lines or leave academia altogether. And if you look at just tenured faculty, 70% are men married with children compared to 44% of women. And then similarly to what I just talked about, women are overrepresented among contingent, part-time, non-tenure track faculty. They also tend to spend more time teaching, mentoring, and engaging in service roles than male counterparts as well. And so really the impacts can be really long-term. Also, women are publishing in different places. So I mentioned before that less higher impact journals, and that might have some ramifications for career advancement. And so these issues related to tenure and women in academia have been existing for many, many years, many decades, although COVID has really exacerbated a lot of these challenges. Another thing to consider is that there are differences by institution as well. So the perception of support and happiness among mothers varies dramatically by the institution in which they're employed. So community college professors and those at research intensive universities report the highest levels of support and happiness. They report that they have more resources, more opportunity to change their workload, which gives them a greater perception of satisfaction. The faculty at primarily teaching universities fared the worst because they perceive that their roles are more rigid, more time consuming. And so that is something important to consider when we're talking to our graduate students about academic roles, or also being more aware of faculty satisfaction for women in some of these more teaching intensive universities. There's very little research about female faculty in school psychology programs specifically. So if there are people listening that need to do some research, this is a great area. But in general, the research that's been done in school psychology shows us that women are more likely to have faculty positions in non-doctoral programs, also less likely to receive organizational honors, and are less likely to be included in top tier journals as contributors of research. So let's talk about some of the things that predict career success. So there are some things that we can make sure that we try to bolster, or ways in which we can support particularly women around academic motherhood. So first of all, research to support that receiving mentorship specifically around academic motherhood can improve career success. Also, the perception of flexibility within one's position also is predictive of career success. And that support at the department or program level. And what that support is really, again, the perception of the individual, if they feel like they're being supported by the department or program. So this would be something that would be a great conversation to have with an individual in terms of what support would look like for that particular person. If they perceive that they have a supportive partner, that's also predictive of career success. And then the perceived feelings of increased levels of efficiency and prioritization as well can contribute to that. And then I want to make sure all of us know that there's research around advocacy at the administrative level. And if we can encourage administrators and people on university committees, such as tenure committees, hiring committees, et cetera, if we can help shift some of that focus, that architecture that we currently have within academia to better fund gender equity, that's going to be a wonderful thing that all of us can contribute to, even just by speaking up about some of the research that I'm presenting, or maybe serving on some of these committees as well. There's research showing that gender neutral parental leave is critically important to women seeking faculty positions. And also having flexible working arrangements. And again, that idea of flexibility is individually based, but if the person perceives that there is that flexibility inherent within their position, that also leads to higher career success. And this last one is something that I'm thinking all the people on the panel will probably talk about, but accessible and affordable childcare is incredibly important to career success for women in academia as well. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Erin, and just a reminder that please put any questions you have in the chat throughout the presentation.
Hello again, everyone. I will just be talking a little bit about my experience and some of the strategies that have been helpful for me. Before talking about some of the strategies, though, I'll just talk a little bit just about my general experience. So I became a parent after my first year as a faculty member. So I found out that I would be becoming a parent at the first year after in my first academic position, my first tenure track academic position. And it was nothing that my now husband and I, we hadn't planned it. We planned to become parents later. So it was quite an adjustment that we had to make on the fly and figure things out. At the time, we weren't even living in the same city. So he decided to move where I was in Ohio at the time. And he was living in New York. And so we had to make some major adjustments, but we figured it out, we made it work. I did have to go through all the, feelings of how am I going to talk to my colleagues about this? They probably thought that they were hiring this new faculty with no children in sight and who probably would just be able to devote all of her attention to her position and so forth and so on. So I had to go through that, with myself and just kind of say, you know what, this is what it is. This is my life. I don't owe anyone an apology. I don't owe anyone an explanation. This is just how things are going to be. So I had to make some personal adjustments and seek the supports that I needed and from my husband and myself. And just at that time, it was also just a very interesting time in dealing with, coping with a lot of the socio-political issues that have been happening that we are still dealing with every day. And so for me as a Black faculty member at a predominantly white institution, dealing with those things on an everyday basis and also kind of negotiating who I was in this new place as a person, not just as a parent, but just as a new faculty member in a new city that was quite different. I'm originally from Atlanta and did my graduate studies at Georgia State. And so this place was very different going from Atlanta, Georgia to Oxford, Ohio and Miami. So I was also dealing with that adjustment and making just several adjustments personally, and also dealing with being a racial minority faculty member at a PWI and just had so much going on. So on top of everything else, becoming a parent and just figuring all of that out, I did have to put several strategies in place for support. One of the main, strategies that was helpful for me was just being intentional about the social support groups, academic and non-academic peers. I did do the School Psychology Research Collaboration Conference through SSSP. So I did SPRCC. Lindsay, who'll speak next, was in my group, and several others who we've kept in contact. Some of us have continued to do work together, and that was critical, I think, for just academically and professionally, but also personally, to establish those connections through SPRCC. And so I would not trade that experience for anything. That was just very, very helpful. And then also having non-academic folks who I could, talk to about, about life, and just to put those supports in place were critical for me. And finding also at my university, finding people who I could talk to, who I felt like I could trust regarding my transition, who I could go to about, some of the challenges that I may have been experiencing was extremely helpful for me. Another thing that was helpful that I have always, this is probably my first semester not being a part of a writing group, whether it been something that was university-based or school psych, my school psych peers. I've been involved in several writing groups, and that has been helpful for me. Everybody doesn't need that group accountability. I find it to be incredibly useful. So at my prior university, there was a college, the College of Education had folks who came together and sponsored a writing group. And through that group, the college actually funded it. And so we were able to pay for our lunches and for the days that we met. And that was just helpful to develop connections with peers throughout the College of Education. And then at my current university at A&M Commerce, there is also a college-based writing group that I joined and have been a part of last semester. Like I said, this has been the first semester in a while that I have not been a part of a writing group. I'm also the program coordinator, and we're hiring 2 new faculty members right now. And so my life has been kind of consumed by the search and so many other things going on. But my priority for next semester is to get back involved and to have that group accountability, because I have seen a difference between my productivity being a part of a group and just not. I have not prioritized my writing in the same way. And so that's something that I would love to become a part of again. And I've also led the writing group. So even one thing that I did was probably the same year I had my son, I took over the writing group. I took over the writing group in our college. And that's something that I'm not sure I would do again. For me, I felt like, I had to prove that I was still on top of everything. I had to prove that I was still, on top of my work and on top of my writing and research. And while that is important, I do think that it was more, it wasn't just for me. It was more for so that I could feel like everyone thought that I was still on top of everything. And so there was a bit of, going back, I don't think I would feel that same pressure. I would still want to be involved, but I wouldn't feel the need to necessarily be the one who was scheduling meetings, ordering lunches, and so forth and so on. I'm not ashamed to say that I prioritize my own counseling supports for myself and my family. With COVID happening, it's just been a lot, and coping with the changes, coping with everything that has been going on. For me personally, it's been a personal choice to rely on other professionals who I could seek support from. And I think that may not be, something that everyone feels like they want to do or need to do. But I always feel like, particularly with periods of transition, that is something that has been very helpful for me. Also, just non-school site creative activities for work-life balance has been something that I, put in place just to have other things to put my hands in. So before COVID, I was really active in an improv and sketch comedy group, and that's something that I, just love to do, and feel that it gives me a great balance in my life. And so hopefully after things get a little bit, back to normal, that's something that I would love to get more involved in again. Right now, I don't really feel like I have even time to do those sorts of things, but I think just like prioritizing writing, and putting that on my calendar for however long. Then let me go back to that. So as far as the writing and the writing productivity and the research productivity, I do think it is beneficial to put that in your calendar. Many of us probably already do that anyway, but I put it in my calendar as a meeting like anything else. And so if anyone wants to schedule anything during that time, I look at my calendar, and if it's during that time, I try to say no to whatever it is to keep me focused on that time of day for doing what I need to do for my writing and research productivity. And then just lots of self-compassion and grace. I have, had to realize that I can't do it all, that it's okay to have to say no to some things. It's okay to not be able to do every single panel or every single event, or to be on every committee that I'm asked to be on. And so saying, it's okay to not be able to do it all. It's okay to ask for help has been extremely helpful just for me to be able to maintain my peace of mind during this time. And so those are just a few strategies that I can think about now, and I'm happy to add on during our open Q&A session when it's time.
Thank you so much, Erin. We are going to move into Lindsay's section.
Wonderful. Hi, I'm Lindsay Fallon again, and I really, really appreciated everything Erin said, and I think I'll probably be supplementing a lot of the reflections and suggestions or strategies. I just wanted to first start off to say that I am here to learn as much as I'm here to share. So I'm really looking forward to learning from the other presenters as well. And although I've technically been a parent for almost 10 years, I feel some days like a complete beginner or novice. And although I've technically been an academic or in academia for almost 7 years, again, some days totally feel like it's my first day. COVID's been really hard. I think one of the things I've been reflecting on is how much our routines have been completely shot. Bedtime here is just out of control, but I do sort of have faith that we'll kind of rebuild and get back to routines. And as Erin put it, just giving myself and our family grace around how we're making our way through each day. So as I mentioned at the top of the hour, I have 3 wonderful, amazing, light of my life children. Zach on the left is 9, Emily on the right is 6, and in the middle we have Aubrey, who's 3. And I, again, resonated with Erin's story around the timing of these additions to my life. So Zach was actually a very happy surprise right before I was planning to go on internship as a doctoral candidate. So I was very kind of unsure of how to proceed, and I got really great advice from my advisor to take time with him. And I was very privileged to be able to spend a year doing some dissertation data collection, but really just spending time with him at home. And then with Emily, I had just kind of come out of postdoc and was about 2 months into having her when I started my first academic position. And I was pregnant when I was interviewing, and I wasn't really showing yet. So that was an interesting process to navigate, because we would go out to dinner and I'd be offered beverages, and and just so I didn't necessarily feel comfortable sharing that's where I was. And I just want to encourage folks to think about that. Again, to Bryn's point, this is your personal private information, and you should do what you're comfortable doing. But I do remember for one of the interviews I was on, I don't know if that's legal, but I answered that I was. And so I felt like, in some situations I kind of put that on the table, in other situations I didn't, but you don't have to. And actually started that position in sort of a fog and a blur. And for a year, I just remember a lot of pumping and teaching and service. And I don't really remember much else. So that was not necessarily the exact kind of storybook parenthood experience that I'd envisioned growing up, but it was wonderful and beautiful and hectic and crazy all at the same time. And then with Aubrey, I had tried to be a little bit more planful in the timing of her delivery, and she came 6 weeks early. So she came in the middle of the semester. I was on bed rest in the hospital for, several weeks. And so you can make all kinds of plans. And I've learned that those plans really can turn up not to matter at all. So I say all this in the spirit of flexibility and grace, and that you will get through more challenging times and unexpected times. And I am really feel very grateful to have these smiling faces. But this is sort of our Instagram. This slide really reflects the reality of our situation most of the time, where we have just fun and crazy moments day after day. So I didn't want to convey that every day is picture perfect by far, although we have a great time. So I thought I'd start with a few challenges. My partner and I are both, again, really, really fortunate to be working from home, but my hours are more flexible, to Bryn's point earlier. Therefore, I do take on more of the child-related responsibilities. And I was reflecting on that as I was putting together these slides, as it just means that I work at times that I might not have worked previously. One thing I try to do is I try not to send emails when I'm working off hours, but schedule them to send later. And that was actually the recommendation of our incoming dean, to sort of kind of manage everybody's feelings and sort of different work schedules during COVID, and not to set the norm that we should be working, at whatever hours, but really making it work for us, and not expecting email to occur off hours necessarily. I too get excited about new opportunities, but time is limited, and I want to have the energy to do what I agree to do well. So I think that means, to Erin's point, saying no sometimes, and I just wanted to echo that. Both of my professional and personal roles, I would say, are time intensive, and I think that leaves little time to myself, but I've been learning how to carve out more time, and have really tried to move every day and take time with my kids every day, and with my partner every day. So I encourage others to explore that, but again, give yourself grace if you're not necessarily finding a lot of time for it. I think everyone will get there. So some strategies. I've learned that, I've been thinking about how we're not all going to have the same output. And for me, that's okay. Careers are long. I'm thinking about my role as a parent. I have this tendency to want to do a lot, and I've just come to accept and realize and be grateful that I don't have to volunteer for every single thing at my kid's school, nor I think the next one is and that my to-do list will probably be long. And that's sort of the nature of the job, right? Like we just always have things that we have going on. And, you know, my partner is in a position where he kind of clocks out and is done for the day. And that's just not how this position is for me. So I've learned to accept that and sort of live in the, you know, knowing that there's always going to be something on the horizon to do. I've learned that my children will nearly always pop in during a Zoom. They don't really care who's on the call, so they'll always be in attendance. I'm surprised I haven't seen one of them here yet, but you know, that's okay. I think it used to make me a little nervous in the beginning, but now it's just kind of an expectation, I think, at this point. And I have started to put up, I think you can go to the next one, Bryn. I've started to put up a Zoom background or kind of a blurred Teams background when it seems like it might be more important to not have that distraction, like a dissertation proposal or something like that. But I would say it's pretty much always guaranteed that they'll visit during a meeting. Again, they don't mind who's on the call. So there's another one of Emily assisting in another meeting. You know, another reflection, and this is not necessarily related to COVID, but just in general, you know, some days I feel like I get a lot done and other days I don't. And I've learned that that's kind of the cycle, and that's how it works for me in terms of productivity. And I'm okay with that. I learned that I've realized about myself, I'm a morning person. I tend to be more efficient in the morning with regard to writing. So I try to reserve more cognitively demanding tasks for morning hours, and then email or meetings or planning later in the afternoon when I'm sort of out of steam. I've become comfortable asking for extensions if I need them. I try to honor the commitments I've made. I think this has come up mostly in like manuscript reviews, whereas I've always been sort of a deadline person and not wanting to disappoint. Sometimes I need more time, and I've started to ask for it. And I have to say 99% of the time, people are very receptive and willing to extend deadlines. And they're reasonable, understandable people. I've learned that to accept that as long as we all live in our house together, that I probably won't live in a very organized environment. I've also learned that I'm not particularly crafty. These are things that I think I had set visions for myself that I'm learning are, you know, that I may not have realized, and that's okay. Parenthood is fun like that. I think Erin brought up this point, I try to have the next meeting on the books kind of at the end of a meeting with someone, because I want to sort of hold myself accountable and know just how to structure my time and when I need to have something done. So I really make an effort to follow up then at the end of a meeting to make sure we have our next time to check in set. And I try to communicate what I can give during that time and be really upfront about expectations, particularly when it comes to new partnerships, as we're starting, you know, to learn each other's availability and expertise. I try to be communicative about that. And just a few more, I try to be understanding with students so that they're understanding with me. I have a lot of students who are, you know, expecting babies, or not a lot. I have a few students that are expecting children soon, or who are thinking about family planning. And I try to be very practical and supportive in thinking through that piece with them. And I try to keep to do what interests me, but I also know that sometimes I have to take one for the team, sit on a committee that I maybe isn't as interesting to me, but I know it will support the broader group or will be important for students or for our faculty. So that's all I have to contribute, and I look forward to the end of the rest of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. We're going to turn it over to Sterret.
All right, hello everybody. I'm Sterret Mercer at University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. Great. Next slide, please. And before I begin, I just want to take some time to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from the land of the Tsleil-Waututh, Coquitlam, Squamish, and Musqueam peoples. All right. So, and kind of looking back and thinking about my time as a parent, for me, a lot of what comes to mind are kind of the challenges of, and I guess benefits of being in a dual academic family. So, sometimes people refer to the two-body problem, just the challenges of being able to find employment that you both are happy with in the same location. And it is really challenging. So I'll kind of talk about that a bit. All right, so I tried to throw together a timeline, which it's a mess, which I think adequately represents, what it was like living those experiences. But essentially, around 2005, finished graduate school at Tulane in New Orleans. I got bounced around due to Hurricane Katrina, but eventually had a research job in North Carolina where I met my wife. Danny. Her background is in management. She works at the business school here. Not too long after getting together, we had our first child, somewhat surprisingly. So kid one came before either one of us had an academic position. We were fortunate at the time. My family lived somewhat close by and could chip in, and that really helped in those earlier years. We did both think that we had found a solution to the two-body problem in getting assistant professor positions at University of Southern Mississippi about a year after Juliana was born. And we started off there. My parents actually moved along, shortly thereafter, so we still had some of those kind of childcare supports. And kid number two, Lucia, was born around that time, a couple of years into that. Around that time, it became kind of clear that we were not collectively happy where we were, and tried to figure out a different strategy. So strategy one was to try to find simultaneous employment. Strategy two was, well, let's just maybe try to find a place where we can be, where there appear to be enough universities that maybe it's possible that we could both end up being employed. And really this time from 2008 to 2012, oh man, that was something else. But my wife in 2010 moved to the Netherlands with the younger daughter. I still had the older daughter in Mississippi for a year, then had the job at UBC in Vancouver and moved with one child. Eventually, due to childcare problems, I had both kids for a while, 6 months or so when my wife was still in the Netherlands. Then thankfully in 2012, we both ended up in the same place. At a different university in the same kind of geographical location, and things have kind of slowly improved since then. All right, next slide. All right, so this is kind of like the non-optimal living situation here, in terms of being on different continents, with kids on different continents and so on. Thankfully, that did improve in 2012. But even being in the same geographical region, there still were some big challenges. Initially, we both lived where it says Sterret work, that's where UBC is. We both lived on campus for a while, but there was a challenge. This blue line is the commute to my wife's primary place of employment. And for a while, we only had one vehicle, and that was by transit, probably an hour and 45 minutes. By car, it can be up to an hour and a half and so on. So after a year or so of that, which really wasn't working, we're like, well, maybe we'll try to live about halfway in between, and that's where the home slide is there. That really actually didn't work well at all, because then both of us actually were like commuting all of the time. And you can see the next slide, we actually have put everything at my wife's place of work at Simon Fraser University. We live on the campus there. It's actually quite nice. It's on top of a little mountain. My work is still quite far away, but also I haven't been to work in over a year, due to COVID. But even before that, try to just have a couple of really long days on campus and spend the rest of the time working there. there was kind of a sweet time frame where the kids' elementary school was actually in walking distance here. That was really nice. Now they've kind of gone to optional programs in high school. But like it's still kind of close. In the mornings they take the bus on their own on the way there, the city bus, you know, and that's really helpful. The other additions, my wife has a horse in Burnaby Lake Park there, you know, that's close to her house that, you know, she goes there pretty much every day. And I have a fishing kayak that I store at another lake close by there that makes it possible to kind of drop down for a boat ride. All of it's much more condensed geographically. And that's really been quite helpful. All right, so now that we have kind of a more optimal geographic location, did that solve everything? No, not really. You can imagine what it's like in COVID. I haven't seen my parents and who knows how long they live in the States. My wife's dad is in Germany, hasn't been able to visit him. So like the families in different countries is still a challenge. And whenever we do work-related travel again, you know, that's a challenge, particularly when the kids were younger, you know, and, you know, they couldn't look after themselves for a period of time, or you'd have to transport them everywhere. I think that's getting easier over time, but certainly when they were younger, that was a challenge. But overall, like, I mean, there's just a time crunch, you know, even pre-COVID, you know, like, what's going to happen when a kid gets sick? And that was really a challenge when we were spread out geographically. What if it was my time to be on call, but the kids were located far away? Well, if you get the call, it could still take an hour to get there to pick them up and so on. You know, and just the scheduling of classes. For us, the classes tend to be, you know, 4:30 to 7:30 p.m. Well, that can be a challenge with family time and so on. And really kind of one challenge that we've had is just dealing with cost of living here. It is quite expensive. And trying to figure out a place where we could afford to live, you know, that was, you know, working kind of geographically has been a challenge. I'm still not sure that we figured it out, but it's certainly better than it was. But, you know, ultimately, I think at various times, you know, I would say that at least one of us, if not two of us, have been kind of unhappy about like a work family related decision or issue. And that's kind of ongoing. I mean, I think the current status here, like looking at the timeline, I have recognized that I've probably dictated location a bit more than would have been optimal. And it's time, I think, for my wife to make a decision, like in terms of where we want to be. The nice thing is now that like the kids are older and we're farther along in career, I mean, that could involve moving somewhere else, or it may just be like spending several months a year somewhere else, like the Netherlands or Germany or whatever else. You know, you start to have a bit more of that flexibility as the kids get older. Things that have been going well, I think just having really understanding kids, you know, as they've grown older, I think they've started to understand that their parents are a little bit bizarre and that we kind of live by the computer and write and have unusual schedules, you know, relative to other families. But they also kind of see that, oh, okay, that's what they start to understand. That's why we're doing what we do, and see some of the advantages here, like during COVID, and that, you know, we both do have some degree of schedule flexibility. Another strength would be just like where we work, you know, have caring colleagues, a family-friendly culture, wonderful parental leave policies that unfortunately we never experienced because we weren't living here at the time. Say that both of us are productive enough. I mean, we've progressed in our careers. We certainly take time for hobbies. One thing I think that's really helped, that's come up again, just making sure that we have friends who are not academics. I mean, academics are great, don't get me wrong. It's great to be on the panel, but it's also nice to have good friends who are on more of kind of like a, I guess, a normal schedule, you know, to don't have the warped sense of time that we sometimes get in academia, where we tend to think in terms of like 6 months to a year as being like recent. Other people typically don't think that way. So it's helpful to do that. And certainly like already having a university culture where people didn't come to campus a whole lot. I mean, it's kind of disappointing in terms of campus life, but it's actually quite helpful, you know, in terms of managing family flexibility. One thing that I think is important to acknowledge as a man in a faculty position is that I believe we have a responsibility to speak up about family concerns. and to make it clear, like when we say, no, I'm not going to be there for a meeting at 5 o'clock because I have family obligations, like that's something we have to do. And because it can help set a new precedent. And because there's really no cost, if anything, like I feel like when men do that, sometimes like we get advantages in some ways because people are like, oh, you're being a super dad and so on. But at the same time, we have to do that because I think it sets a different norm for people with family obligations. And, you know, we've talked about parenthood here, but a lot of people, like my colleagues, have elder care responsibilities right now that you can imagine what that's like in COVID and dealing with care home issues. But just being able to speak up that like, we do have other things that work, you know, isn't more than a third of our life. It shouldn't be, you know, like we're supposed to do that 8 hours a day, several days a week. Trying to keep that in context is really important. As a man also, we have to step up and engage in the business of the university, just meaning service. You know, we know that women do disproportionately more service. Well, we have to do our part, particularly as we progress in our career. You know, and then ultimately, I think it's important to acknowledge that different people make different decisions for different reasons. And that's critically important. It's fine. Whatever you're doing now to get by, it's fine. It's going to work out. We're all struggling kind of regardless of stage of career and so on. And let's get through it and then we'll figure out how to deal with it later. Just get through it. And it really does get easier over time.
Thank you so much, Sterret. So we're going to turn it over to Shannon.
Great, thank you. And thanks for inviting me to this panel, Bryn. And I appreciate you arranging us speaking in terms of like, as you put it, seniority, but also I think our kids are older as we're talking more. And it hopefully will have a light at the end of the tunnel for those of you who have babies and kids who are in more needy stages. So I was at USF for my fifth year when Emma was born, and I was very steeped in my work. And this is a picture of her at 4 months old, being part of the judging committee for the School Psych Review Article of the Year. She was a well-read 4-month-old, and she grew up on campus. So this is her 5 years later with our university president, who she ran right up to and said, "You're my mommy's boss." And the president turned and said, "Get her some more presents." And she's holding her, her extra bracelets. So my kids, every President's Day, come to USF. They could do the campus tour. This is Blake also in the picture. President's Day is on Monday. They're not off of school Monday. I teach on Mondays. So they come to campus and they're very fluent with being independent, walking around to various places to eat. They enjoy it there. It's really, I feel like, been a benefit of our family that they are steeped not only in our community we live in, our church community, but also our university committee. Some perks that happened more relatively recently is them being part of our university and academic community. They've been traveling with me to conferences. So I had the wonderful fortune of, before COVID, going to Australia for a conference, and they were more than delighted to come with me to the World Congress on Positive Psychology. And while mommy was presenting, in the next picture, you'll see them touring around Melbourne. No one missed me at all. They were delighted to have the opportunity to sightsee. So definitely some nice perks, I feel like, to having a family grow up on campus. So my trajectory has been really linear. I was married for 10 years before we had Emma, and that was a very deliberate choice on my part. I think some of, honestly, being somewhat traumatized, seeing when I was a graduate student, seeing women not get tenured, I was pretty nervous about it myself. So we decided to wait until I was very close to a tenure point to even try to have our first child. And Emma was born after 4 really, really focused work as an assistant professor. I work so much harder than I could even imagine working now. It gets much easier and the payoff is great, quite frankly. So when Emma was born, 2008, there was no university maternity policy. My department chair said, women have babies in the summer. I said, I tried it, it didn't work out. Here we are. So I had to ask colleagues to cover my courses, which they did for 6 weeks. That was very kind of them. There was no backup plan. It was, they helped me out, or I don't know what the alternative was. Actually, I was told that one other professor had a baby and she still taught 2 weeks later. And that to me didn't seem fathomable. So I had 6 weeks to figure it out. By the time after Emma was born, I had 2 more years of pretty intense data collection, and then had Blake. And by that time, the university had passed what is quite frankly a pretty generous parental leave policy. It's now a full semester leave with no responsibilities for mothers and fathers for 2 children. It's a little judgmental there, but 2 children are encouraged. And my department chair at the time, then different than when I had Emma, asked me to take the leave. And I had Blake in April. I still taught in the summer, honestly, if they needed the money, and we get extra pay for summer. But he said, I would like the other mothers in our college to see an example of a successful professor who takes the parental leave without penalty. So I took the leave in the fall, even though I had taught throughout the summer. I still, though, still worked half time because I had a federal grant that I couldn't just stop or else the work stopped. And then it was promoted to professor 7 years ago now, so it's a crazy forever ago. But it's a much easier life at the top of the food chain if you can hang in there. So not only is it easier at work, it's easier with my children being older. When they were itty bitty, it was really, really hard. But it also brought a balance that I didn't have in my life before they were born. There was a lot more joy when they came into our family. But now it's really spectacular. They are just the best part of my day and not a lot of hard work because they're older. So little Blakers is now in 4th grade, something on the bus. He walks himself to and from the bus stop, comes home and follows his routine like to the T. My daughter started middle school at a magnet school. So now I'm chauffeuring the carpool 3 shifts a week. That's my carpool group to the right. But it's easier days. And when I pick them up and hear their stories of being 6th graders, it's just the best. Who has a new girlfriend, who got trouble with social media. It's a highlight. So carpool is tough to navigate, but you've heard from other people, I do work at random hours. So I take off every day from 2:30 to 5 for various carpool duties since COVID, and we've lost our ability to keep a nanny because of health restrictions. But I have no issues working from 9 to 12, which is my choice on the days I choose to do it. If I don't choose to do it, then I just do less work, and that's fine too. So you have a lot of obviously flexibility in that kind of decision, but especially a lot once you are not tenure earning. So some tips that kind of worked out for me in those child rearing years was to cut myself some slack when I knew I was not in a period that no matter how hard I worked, it wasn't be worth it. But then when there were periods I could work hard, like really take advantage of those. So for me, obviously those first 4 years when I was tenure earning without having Emma were what I rode the coattails of for quite a time afterwards. And then while I was pregnant, 2nd trimester was a nice time to shine. And then just give it up when they're in the baby stage because it is grueling physically and the payoff is small and they're only a baby for so little time. But after age 1, it's a lot easier. So cutting yourself some slack, realizing that a career is long. This is a time limited time of physical demands. In European countries, you wouldn't be trying it. So recognizing that in of yourself, and again, like riding those coattails from the better times. So during those optimal times is when I would start new projects, write, turn stuff in, be productive, prep new classes, all that stuff, anytime besides the year after they were born. And then for parental leave, there's a lot of pressure that, well, you're on leave, but other people are not. And it takes, practice, looking in the mirror, saying no, but it's worth it. So the things that I would say no to completely was anything to do with service, faculty meetings, data collections that I couldn't have somebody else help do instead of me. And then new research projects. Like I'd let myself not even entertain those things. For students who are progressing along good schedules, I did still help out with reading their documents from time to time. Sometimes a lot of times taking part in their thesis and dissertation defense meetings, because I felt personally obligated to keep them moving quickly. However, if a student had taken a lot of time and then it was a good time for them, like no. So being deliberate with when I would be available for those students who otherwise I would impede their progress. And the things that were important to me to keep doing, even on those leave periods, were things that were personally beneficial, like my promotion materials. I love graduation ceremonies. And then those time-sensitive tasks that I worked hard to get to that point. If I didn't literally read page proofs on the hospital ride home from the hospital, then the article might be published with errors or not at all. So those things that were already in the pipeline that were important to my career, I tried to prioritize. Next slide. So returning to work, the key to my success is good childcare. My parents don't live close by. They do live in the state, but they have their own active lives. I have accepted that the house I bought 16 years ago will be with me for life. We're not getting a larger house forever because I am investing in childcare and I'm investing in other things that make my life easier. So my bar is low in lots of areas. Where the bar is high is we will be paying X amount of money for assistance as needed. We were fortunate to find a nice group daycare when the kids were littler. It was attached to our church. And that worked out really well for me to have the availability to drop off kids at like really random hours. You could do data collection or stay late. As they got older and were involved in after school activities, then we spent the money on a nanny instead and had a 20-hour-a-week nanny from the time they were kindergarten through 4th grade. And that worked out super well for us, because otherwise trying to find somebody who will be your Uber to after school activities is really difficult. So again, going into it knowing that I will spend near a mortgage on childcare is just, it is what it is. The choice that I have made deliberately, so that I'm not trying to do it all, because technically you could do what I'm doing right now, which is only for a COVID exception of working multiple hours into the evening, which is not good for your health. I appreciated Erin's suggestion to seek counseling and to accept that professional assistance. Otherwise, you're left coping with things like drinking way too much wine, et cetera, in tough times when we are doing both roles. Next slide, please, Bryn. So when you go back to work, thinking about the tenure clock, I have strong opinions about this. At my university, when they passed out parental leave, they also gave an automatic 1-year extension to the tenure clock when people came back from parental leave. And there's a financial implication for that we don't always think about. And women in particular tend to not always have the confidence in our ability to achieve tenure, what we've done so far, as opposed to what we rather would have put forward. And when people make that decision to extend your tenure clock, it might help if you need more things, like legitimately more things in order to get tenured, but it's also an extra year that you're not getting the salary that you would as a promoted professor. So we, Sterret and Jess Hoffman and I wrote about that in a chapter that came out recently in a book I'd be happy to send you the chapter for, but there is that financial penalty that people don't always think about. They just take the automatic 1-year extension. Cutting yourself some slack, I think you've heard from several of us, and keeping in mind the limits of humanity, that we can't do it all, right? So in my situation, it's like, who needs me the most right now? And let me be preventive when I can. So there's some like goodwill with folks who are not getting my full attention at times, but you certainly just can't do it all. Having other families, not just, I like Sterret's idea of having families that are not in academia, but families of children is really critical, so that you have that social support of other individuals that are figuring it out as they go also. And another thing I've tried to really think through is like work-related travel. If I'm gonna do it, can I bring my family so it's like a family trip? And if not, I probably am not gonna be heading that direction. Not that anyone's traveling now. Trying to set limits that we've heard about, and then practicing saying no. So I don't say yes to anything before I've thought about it for a few days. And I try to think through, like, will it fit in my schedule? And if no, what am I going to sacrifice from my children's development that I will never get back? And I somebody who was much wiser than me, when I was contemplating a leadership position years ago, he said to me, you have your whole career to spend your weekends doing this important leadership task. Your kids will only be in your home for 18 years, and you're still around their 15 or so in academia. And it was such good advice. So keeping in mind like the sacrifice that things will take when you decide to say yes or no. The writing club that you heard earlier discussed is described also in Sylvia's How to Write a Lot book, and I love that resource. Okay, next slide. So despite those challenges with balance, there's just so many advantages, right, that come with being in academia if you're a parent. The flexibility of your schedule is second to none. I love that I can declare, I'm not going to the office for the kids' spring break. I'll teach my one class, and other than that, I'm going to be with them, and I will make up for that time later on if needed. But you have the flexibility to be able to choose like where you're at, when you're at, and that's a beautiful situation. I've found in my own family, it's provided a nice professional role model for my daughter. When she was in preschool, had to write about her future career. It was pop star, dolphin trainer at SeaWorld, or a professor. And then she chose to draw herself as Professor Emma. Love that. I get a lot of fulfillment in both areas of my life that I couldn't imagine getting in a way that would be matched if I had a non-academic position. And then as you become further up the food chain, it just becomes so much easier and cushier and worth it, quite frankly. And when I think about now, like changing positions or going into a different even leadership role at my university or a different kind of job, I think, but then I have to work as hard as I did like 5-10 years ago. And that's just not where I'm at right now. And you have the opportunity to kind of make those choices for yourself.
Thank you so much, Shannon.
Sure.
Okay, at this point, we are going to open it up to questions. I'm going to look in the chat, and it looks like there are no questions so far, but if anyone has a question, I would love for you to write it in the chat. I will go ahead and start with one question, and I will just defer to whoever wants to respond first from our panel. But a lot of people are surprised to hear that there can be a negotiation process regarding your parental leave. And I'm curious if anybody on the panel has recommendations for things to consider or ways in which to negotiate an optimal leave for yourself.
Well, I don't know, this might not be answering the question, Bryn, but I think one thing that I really appreciated the slide that Shannon had up, because I think one thing, I don't know if I would include this in a negotiation, but I think I'll start with how I might communicate with students, and then if others have thoughts around department chairs or deans or other university administrators, that'd be really helpful. But I think one thing I thought about was just my commitment to my students, and I wanted them to feel supported, but also see sort of a model of someone who is going to take time to engage in parenthood. And so I really liked the structure of Shannon's slide around how certain commitments will remain, even though there are things that we could probably just have completely stop for a while, just to honor that leave. So I would say informally having transparent conversations with students about what they can expect and that they're still supported, even if you're not around for a few months or several months, but that you can communicate those boundaries to be time with your newborn.
I could add to Lindsay's comments. If you're child rearing and you're tenure earning, there are some realities with not always having the power to negotiate much beyond what you're told, right? And one of the things that I've appreciated about now being on the other side of the fence is actively seeking out mentoring roles of more junior faculty who are child rearing. And if you're feeling that you're asked something that's unusual, having someone you could go to who's not your supervisor, but somebody who's been more senior at your university, and bouncing ideas off of them. This is what I was asked to do. Is this reasonable? And if it's not, how would you suggest I manage that? So I've seen that be very helpful for individuals who either didn't realize that what they're being asked to still do is pretty typical, or having the reverse situation of like, no, like that's not humanly possible. Let's figure out how in your program you can, in a politically sensitive way, push back on that and ask your colleagues for some more assistance.
Yeah, in retrospect, I think I would have probably leaned on others a little bit more to kind of find out what the norms were. I just thought like, okay, this is what I've been told that I would be given, and this is what I have to take. And but I also had a really understanding and sensitive department head at the time who went kind of above and beyond to make sure, you know, I was okay, and to kind of make things work beyond what the typical norms were. So I really felt lucky. And now being, you know, if I had to do it again, or if I was, you know, just trying to figure it out, I would know a little bit more about what to expect or to maybe ask others. But I did feel just a bit clueless about, you know, what to expect or what I should, you know, ask for, and was very lucky to have had someone who was almost hypersensitive to the needs of new parents in the department. And I would hope to be that way as a, you know, as a leader in the department as well. So.
Thank you all. These are wonderful ideas. Another thing I wanted to throw out is if you all would talk about some surprises or things that you didn't expect about academic parenthood. One of the things that comes to my mind is I used to cook before my kids. I used to cook all the time and I loved it. And I just expected to continue to do that, and how challenging meal planning and going to the grocery store and little things were to fit into my life I didn't expect. Are there other things like that that stand out to the panelists?
I mean, that's such a big one. Those are huge ones. And going back to what Lindsay said, just I look at pictures of my place before having children, and look at what the reality is like day to day now, and just having to let go of those expectations on what the house should look like, and, you know, being okay with asking for help or hiring help if that's available, you know. But just really relaxing those expectations, I think, can relieve so much stress, and saying, you know, is this reasonable right now? So, but that was, for me, it was just like, you know, letting go of, you know, what I thought was, you know, what life would be would be like, you know. So
I think I was surprised that kids get sick so often. So like, you think you have it all worked out and you have a schedule that's working for all, and they get so many random diseases, right? So I remember, and then I would get sick. So I think I was not prepared for the chronic illness that is toddlerhood and being the parent of a toddler. And like, I think back about now my kids are older, they have, right, they have antibodies for lots of stuff. But there were a lot of really tense, ugly discussions in my house when kids would unexpectedly get sick, in terms of like, whose work is more vital today, right? And once we figured out, like, we need to have a schedule for, if it happens on Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, it's me. If it's Monday or Tuesday, it's him. Like, those were things I did not expect.
I'm actually getting some questions in, and there's one that directly relates to that. So feel free to directly message me if you'd like to remain anonymous with your question. We got a question, how do you navigate responsibilities when your partner's job is not flexible? So just what Shannon was just talking about. For instance, if a kiddo has to miss school for illness, school days off, and the responsibility mostly falls to you, do folks find ways to, quote, buy that time back, or just let it go and not feel guilty if you buy the time back and spend time away from them in the future?
This question really resonates with me because I mentioned before that my partner is in a different field, and so his work hours are pretty structured. But there have been times, and I'll admit it, where I feel like because I've been engaged in more childcare, I'll just have felt like it's piled up, like the workload is piled up. And we, over the summer, like, he might take his kids to his parents' house for the night, and I'll just get a night to just do me for like 24 hours. And it's really the greatest gift if you can arrange for something like that. And it's not like I want to prioritize work over my kids. It's like, I want to be more engaged and fully present with my kids, because I feel like I've checked some things off the to-do list. So if you can navigate some sort of arrangements like that, and that would help you, that's helped me. But it's not, you know, a frequent occurrence. It's kind of like one of those things that we'll sort of arrange if things feel like they've been piling up. But yeah, I would say it's a mix of what you described. Like sometimes I'll just sort of let that time go. Other times I'll try to figure out, you know, a couple hours on a Saturday that I can devote that I maybe hadn't thought I would devote to it, to work.
Maybe I'll jump in a bit.
Thank you.
I'm not in that exact situation, you know, like we're both academics, so there's always a certain degree of flexibility, but I think a lot of it, almost looping back to what Shannon said, is dividing up the week. I mean, that was so essential early on, just kind of being clear, like who's doing pickup on which days, who's kind of on call for emergencies, and to the greatest extent possible, you know, just communicating, like if there's something really serious going on in terms of deadlines, just trying to get the other person to take up the slack during that time. And also, like, even if it isn't urgent, you know, like if you do find yourself with kind of a lighter load, you know, trying to take some of that slack, you know, because it's kind of enjoyable too. You know, I handle a lot of the school stuff in part due to my profession. I'm used to being in schools, you know, and it's great to be there and be present for those times and to try to open up, you know, some time for your partner. But ultimately, I think it's just a constant negotiation. And you just do your best to not be resentful, you know, when things don't work out in your favor, you know, because it's going to happen, and it might happen for a good chunk of time, and just trying to move on from that.
Thank you so much. Communication is really key, it seems. Okay, we have time for one more question. We just have a couple minutes left. We have a participant that is expecting their first child in May. Congratulations. So she's asking, are there questions I should consider asking my department head regarding expectations pertaining to parental leave?
And I think generally, just if there's anything you're considering asking, ask, and don't be afraid to, you know, I mean, I think there are some individual kind of factors there, you know, everyone does not have a super sensitive department head when it comes to these issues and so forth and so on. And so, like I said, I got really lucky. But I think that if there are any questions that you have regarding leave or just generally, do ask in a way that, you know, you feel that may be best received. When it comes to taking leave, I was a little worried about things like, okay, will I be perceived if I add on, particularly if you have someone who may not be quite sensitive to, you know, some of these issues. So.
Thank you so much. We are out of time. I first want to thank our panelists, and I also want to thank all of you for attending today. And please note that the Early Career Forum is here for you. We are ready and willing to write blog posts about topics that are of interest to you, as well as provide additional presentations like this in the future. So please reach out to us if you have any other ideas in that regard. Thank you again for participating.
Thanks for organizing, Bryn.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Bryn. I'll also add, for any of the participants, feel free to reach out by email and whatever else. I'm always happy to have a phone call, whatever, anything I can do to help.
Thank you. It's very generous. Have a good rest of your week.